Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls, she wrestled with her 3 older brothers in the backyard. While they painted their nails, she learned to throw a perfect punch from her father, a retired Marine Corps drill sergeant who believed his daughter should know how to defend herself in any situation. By the time Sarah turned 18, she stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with muscles that spoke of countless hours in the gym. Her dark eyes held a fire that many mistook for anger, but those who knew her well understood it was pure determination. She had one dream that consumed her thoughts day and night: to become the first woman to complete Navy SEAL training. Everyone told her it was impossible. The military had strict rules about women in combat roles, and the SEALs were considered the most elite fighting force in the world. But Sarah had never listened to the word impossible. When she was 12, doctors said she would never walk normally again after a car accident shattered her left leg. She proved them wrong through sheer willpower and endless physical therapy. When teachers said she was too aggressive for a girl and would never succeed in academics, she graduated valedictorian of her high school class. The path to even attempting SEAL training was complicated for a woman. Sarah knew she had to find another way in. She enlisted in the Navy as a hospital corpsman, planning to work her way closer to the special operations community. Her plan was simple but risky: prove herself so valuable and capable that the SEALs would have no choice but to notice her abilities. During her first deployment to Afghanistan, Sarah served as a medic with a Marine unit operating near SEAL territory. The work was dangerous and exhausting. She treated wounded soldiers under enemy fire, carried injured men twice her size to safety, and never once complained about the harsh conditions. The Marines she served with began calling her Steel Sarah because nothing seemed to break her spirit or her resolve. One scorching afternoon in Helmand Province, Sarah's unit was ambushed during a routine patrol. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves in the hills above a narrow valley, and bullets rained down on the American soldiers like deadly hail. 3 Marines went down in the first minutes of the attack. Sarah grabbed her medical bag and sprinted across open ground under heavy fire to reach the wounded men. The first Marine had taken a bullet through his shoulder. Sarah applied pressure to stop the bleeding while calling for air support on her radio. The second man was unconscious with shrapnel wounds across his chest. She worked frantically to stabilize him, knowing that every second counted. But it was the third Marine who presented the biggest challenge. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was a veteran of 4 combat tours and one of the toughest men Sarah had ever met. He was also trapped behind a fallen tree with his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, clearly broken in multiple places. Enemy fighters were closing in on his position, and conventional rescue attempts would result in more casualties. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stripped off her heavy medical gear, keeping only the essential supplies, and belly crawled through a drainage ditch that ran along the valley floor. The ditch was filled with mud and debris, and she had to hold her breath for long stretches as bullets cracked overhead. It took her nearly 30 minutes to reach Rodriguez's position. When she finally arrived, the tough Marine was pale with shock and losing consciousness from blood loss. Sarah quickly assessed his injuries and realized she faced an impossible choice. Moving him would likely cause more damage to his shattered leg, but staying put meant certain capture or death as the enemy fighters advanced. She decided to create a diversion. Using her knowledge of explosives gained from months of working alongside combat engineers, Sarah rigged a series of small charges using medical supplies and equipment from her pack. She set them to detonate in sequence, creating the impression of incoming artillery support. The explosions bought her precious time as the enemy fighters temporarily retreated to covered positions. Working with steady hands despite the chaos around her, Sarah splinted Rodriguez's leg using broken tree branches and strips torn from her own uniform. She then fashioned a crude but effective stretcher from her poncho and 2 rifle slings. The journey back through the drainage ditch was a nightmare. Sarah had to drag the unconscious Marine through mud and standing water, while staying below the sight lines of enemy snipers. By the time she reached friendly lines, Sarah was exhausted and covered in mud from head to toe. But Rodriguez was alive, and his leg would eventually heal completely, thanks to her quick thinking and medical skills. The story of her heroic rescue spread quickly through military channels, reaching all the way to the highest levels of Special Operations Command. 3 weeks later, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her forward operating base. A tall, weathered man in his 40s approached her during chow time. He wore no insignia or rank markings, but something about his bearing suggested he was someone important. Other soldiers seemed to give him extra space and respectful nods as he passed. The man introduced himself simply as Commander Johnson and asked Sarah to take a walk with him. They strolled to a quiet area behind the communications tent, away from curious ears and watching eyes. Commander Johnson studied Sarah's face for a long moment before speaking. He told her that her actions during the ambush had impressed many people, including some who made decisions about special operations personnel. He said there might be opportunities for someone with her skills and determination, but warned her that the path would be harder than anything she had ever experienced. The military was slowly changing its policies about women in combat roles, and there were unofficial programs beginning to test whether female soldiers could meet the same standards as their male counterparts. Sarah's heart raced as she listened. This was the chance she had dreamed about since childhood. Commander Johnson explained that there was an upcoming training exercise where a small number of female military personnel would be allowed to participate alongside Navy SEALs. It would not be official SEAL training, but it would be conducted at the same facility, with the same instructors, using identical standards and methods. The catch was significant. If she accepted the invitation and failed to meet the standards, her military career would likely be over. The Navy would probably transfer her to a desk job, far from any combat operations. But if she succeeded, she would be among the first women to prove that gender was not a barrier to elite military service. Without hesitation, Sarah accepted the challenge. Commander Johnson smiled for the first time during their conversation and handed her a set of orders. She was to report to the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California, in 6 weeks. He warned her to use that time wisely, because what awaited her there would test every aspect of her physical and mental capabilities. As Commander Johnson walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror that she had never experienced before. She was about to step into a world where she would be surrounded by men who had dedicated their lives to becoming the ultimate warriors. Some would welcome her presence, curious to see what she could accomplish. Others would resent her intrusion into their exclusive brotherhood and do everything possible to prove she did not belong. That night, Sarah called her father from a satellite phone, the connection crackling with static across thousands of miles. She told him about the opportunity and asked for his advice. Her father was quiet for a long time before responding. He reminded her that she had never backed down from a challenge in her life, and this was not the time to start. He also warned her that the men she would be training with were not her enemies, but they would test her in ways she could not imagine. The conversation ended with her father's familiar words of encouragement. He told her to trust her training, rely on her instincts, and never forget that she was a Martinez. In their family, giving up was not an option, and failure was simply a reason to try harder the next time. Sarah spent the remaining weeks of her deployment preparing for what lay ahead. She increased her physical training, running longer distances and lifting heavier weights than ever before. She studied everything she could find about SEAL training methods and philosophy. Most importantly, she mentally prepared herself for the reality that she would be entering a world where she had no allies and very few people who believed she could succeed. The day finally came when Sarah boarded a military transport plane for the long journey back to the United States. As the aircraft lifted off from the dusty airfield in Afghanistan, she looked down at the rugged landscape that had tested her in so many ways. She had proven herself as a medic and a soldier in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Now she faced an even greater challenge, proving that a woman could stand shoulder to shoulder with the most elite warriors in the American military. The Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California, was everything Sarah had imagined and more. The facility stretched along miles of pristine Pacific coastline, with obstacle courses, training pools, and classroom buildings that looked deceptively ordinary from the outside. But Sarah knew that behind those walls, ordinary men were transformed into extraordinary warriors through methods that had remained largely unchanged for decades. Sarah arrived on a Sunday evening in early March, when the California air still carried the chill of winter. She checked into temporary quarters and spent her first night studying the training schedule that had been placed on her bunk. The program was called Integration Assessment Protocol, a clinical name that barely hinted at the brutal reality she would face over the next 8 weeks. Monday morning came with the sound of a whistle at 0500 hours. Sarah joined 23 other participants in the pre-dawn darkness outside the main training building. She was surprised to see two other women among the group, Lisa Chen, a Marine Corps intelligence officer from Hawaii, and Amanda Foster, an Air Force pararescue specialist from Colorado. The rest were men from various military branches, all volunteers for this experimental program. Their first instructor was Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a 20-year SEAL veteran whose reputation preceded him throughout the special operations community. Thompson stood 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and scars that told stories of battles fought in distant lands. His voice carried the authority of someone who had led men through life and death situations more times than most people could imagine. Thompson walked slowly down the line of trainees, studying each face with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. When he reached Sarah, he stopped and looked her up and down for what felt like an eternity. She met his gaze without flinching, her spine straight, and her jaw set with determination. Finally, Thompson moved on without saying a word. But Sarah caught something in his expression that might have been approval. The first week was designed to break down the trainees physically and mentally. Days began before sunrise with runs along the beach that seemed to stretch forever. The soft sand made every step a struggle, and the instructors set a pace that pushed even the fittest participants to their limits. Sarah had trained for this, but the reality was harder than anything she had experienced. After the beach runs came calisthenics that tested every muscle group. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and exercises Sarah had never seen before. The instructors demonstrated each movement once and then expected perfect execution. Failure to meet the standards resulted in additional repetitions for the entire group, creating peer pressure that was almost unbearable. Sarah quickly learned that her biggest challenge would not be the physical demands, but the psychological warfare that the instructors waged against every trainee. They used techniques designed to expose weakness and eliminate anyone who lacked the mental toughness required for special operations. Sleep deprivation, constant criticism, and impossible standards were tools used to separate those who truly wanted to be there from those who were simply curious about their own limits. By the end of the first week, 3 men had quit voluntarily. They simply walked into the instructor's office and announced they were done. No one tried to talk them out of their decision. In the SEAL community, quitting was considered a personal choice that revealed character. Those who left were treated with respect, but were also immediately forgotten by those who remained. The second week brought water training that tested a different kind of courage. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, but nothing had prepared her for the pool exercises designed by SEAL instructors. They began with simple underwater swimming, gradually increasing the distance and complexity. Trainees had to swim the length of an Olympic-sized pool underwater while carrying heavy equipment. Failure to complete the swim or surfacing early resulted in immediate repetition of the exercise. The worst part was drown-proofing, an exercise where trainees had their hands and feet bound and were required to survive in the pool for 20 minutes. The technique involved bouncing off the bottom of the pool to surface for air, then sinking back down to rest before repeating the process. It was physically exhausting and mentally terrifying, especially for those who had any fear of drowning. Sarah watched as 2 more trainees quit during water training. One was a tough Army Ranger who had served multiple combat tours but could not overcome his fear of the underwater exercises. The other was a Navy pilot who simply decided the training was not worth the risk to his current career. Lisa Chen struggled with the water training but refused to quit, often finishing exercises with blue lips and shaking hands, but never asking for special consideration. The instructors began to test the trainees in more subtle ways during the third week. They would single out individuals for criticism that seemed unfair or excessive. They would change rules without warning or give conflicting orders to see how trainees would respond under pressure. The goal was to identify those who would crack under the stress of real-world special operations, where clarity and certainty were often luxuries that did not exist. Sarah became a particular target for this psychological pressure, not because the instructors disliked her, but because they needed to know if a woman could handle the same mental stress as her male counterparts. During one memorable exercise, Instructor Thompson accused her of failing to properly secure her equipment before a night navigation course. The accusation was false. And Sarah knew that Thompson knew it was false. But she also understood that arguing would be seen as weakness. Instead of defending herself, Sarah simply acknowledged the criticism and asked what she could do to improve. Thompson studied her face for a moment, clearly testing to see if she would break under the unfair treatment. When she maintained her composure, he moved on to the next trainee without another word. Later, Sarah overheard two instructors discussing the incident, and one commented that she had handled the situation better than most male trainees would have. The fourth week brought combat training that was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her previous military service. SEAL instructors taught hand-to-hand combat techniques that were designed for life-or-death situations where conventional weapons were not available. The training was brutal and realistic, with minimal protective gear and maximum contact. Sarah found herself paired against men who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. The instructors made it clear that there would be no special consideration for size or gender differences. In real combat situations, enemy fighters would not adjust their tactics based on the physical characteristics of American Special Operations personnel. If she wanted to be treated as an equal, she would have to prove she could fight as an equal. The combat training revealed something interesting about group dynamics. Some of the male trainees seemed reluctant to fight Sarah with full intensity, either because they had been raised to never hit women, or because they were afraid of being seen as bullies. Sarah quickly realized that this protectiveness was actually a form of discrimination that could be more dangerous than outright hostility. During one sparring session, Sarah was paired with Jake Sullivan, a former college wrestler from Ohio who had been treating her with kid gloves throughout the training. He was clearly holding back his strength and technique, which frustrated Sarah immensely. She knew that his restraint was preventing her from learning and improving. And it was also sending a message to the instructors that she could not handle real combat training. Sarah decided to force the issue. During their next sparring match, she attacked Sullivan with maximum aggression, using techniques she had learned from her brothers and refined through years of training. She caught him off guard with a combination of strikes that backed him against the wall of the training facility. Sullivan was surprised by her intensity and finally began to fight back with the skill and strength that had made him a successful wrestler. The match lasted nearly 10 minutes, with both trainees giving and receiving punishment that left them bruised and exhausted. Sarah lost the match on points, but she had proven something important to herself and everyone watching. She could absorb punishment and keep fighting. And she could force larger opponents to take her seriously as a threat. After the sparring session, Sullivan approached Sarah with new respect in his eyes. He apologized for not giving her his best effort earlier and promised to train with her as he would with any other teammate. Word of their match spread quickly through the trainee group, and Sarah noticed a change in how the men interacted with her. The protective attitude disappeared, replaced by the professional respect accorded to a fellow warrior. The instructors also took notice of Sarah's performance during combat training. Senior Chief Thompson began including her in advanced technique demonstrations, using her as both an example and a training partner for complex moves. This was significant recognition in a community where instructors rarely singled out individual trainees for positive attention. As the weeks progressed, the training became increasingly specialized and dangerous. Trainees learned to rappel from helicopters, conduct underwater demolition, and navigate through hostile territory using only basic equipment. Each exercise was designed to test a different aspect of the skills required for special operations missions. Sarah excelled in some areas and struggled in others, just like her male counterparts. She was among the best in the group at medical training and battlefield first aid, drawing on her experience as a combat medic. Her shooting scores were consistently high, and she demonstrated exceptional mental toughness during stress exercises designed to simulate combat conditions. However, Sarah found some of the physical strength requirements challenging due to her smaller size. Carrying wounded teammates during rescue exercises required techniques that were different from those used by larger men. She had to be more creative and efficient in her movements, but she found ways to meet the standards without compromising the safety of her training partners. The most significant test came during the 6th week of training. The exercise was called Hell Week, although it only lasted 3 days in this abbreviated version. Trainees were required to operate with minimal sleep while completing a series of increasingly difficult tasks. The goal was to determine who could function effectively when pushed beyond normal human limits. Hell Week began on a Wednesday evening with an equipment inspection that seemed designed to fail everyone. Instructors found fault with every detail, no matter how perfectly prepared the trainees thought they were. Gear was confiscated, uniforms were deemed inadequate, and trainees were sent running to correct problems that seemed to multiply with each attempted solution. The first night involved beach training that lasted until dawn. Trainees were required to carry heavy logs while running through the surf, perform exercises in the freezing Pacific Ocean, and complete obstacle courses that seemed impossibly difficult in the darkness. Sarah's lips turned blue within the first hour, and she lost feeling in her hands and feet by midnight. But she refused to slow down or ask for relief. By Thursday morning, exhaustion was becoming a serious factor for everyone in the group. Trainees had to complete navigation exercises while running on less than 2 hours of sleep. Several men began to show signs of serious fatigue, making mistakes that could have been dangerous in real-world situations. 2 more trainees quit voluntarily, deciding that the risks were not worth the potential rewards. Thursday night brought the most challenging exercise of the entire program. Trainees were divided into 4-person teams and given a rescue scenario that required them to infiltrate a mock enemy compound, locate a captured teammate, and extract him safely while under simulated enemy fire. The exercise was conducted in complete darkness using live ammunition fired over their heads for realism. Sarah's team consisted of herself, Jake Sullivan, Lisa Chen, and a Marine named David Park. They had worked well together during previous exercises, but this mission tested their ability to function as a cohesive unit under extreme stress. Sarah was designated as the team medic, responsible for treating any injuries that occurred during the exercise. The mission began with a 2-mile swim through frigid ocean water to reach the mock compound. Each team member carried full combat gear, including weapons, ammunition, and specialized equipment for their assigned roles. The swim took nearly an hour, and by the time they reached the beach, all 4 teammates were struggling with hypothermia and exhaustion. The compound was a realistic mock-up of a terrorist facility, complete with guard towers, razor wire, and simulated enemy soldiers, played by SEAL instructors. The instructors were armed with paintball weapons that left painful welts when they found their targets. Being killed during the exercise meant immediate failure for the entire team. Sarah's team spent 30 minutes reconnoitering the compound, identifying guard positions, and planning their infiltration route. They decided to enter through a drainage culvert that ran under the main fence, an approach that required them to crawl through muddy water for nearly 100 yards. Once inside the compound, they had to locate their captured teammate without being detected by the roving guards. The facility was a maze of buildings and obstacles, and the darkness made navigation extremely difficult. Sarah used her medical training to move silently through the complex, checking each room methodically while her teammates provided security. They found their objective in the 3rd building they searched. The captured teammate was actually another instructor who was playing the role of a wounded prisoner. He had realistic injuries applied with special effects, makeup, and Sarah had to treat his simulated wounds while planning the extraction route. The escape from the compound proved even more challenging than the infiltration. Enemy guards had been alerted to their presence, and the team had to fight their way out while carrying their wounded teammate. Sarah found herself in several firefights, where she had to provide medical care under simulated enemy fire, a skill that would prove invaluable in real-world situations. The exercise concluded with another ocean swim back to the main training facility, but this time the team had to transport their wounded teammate using improvised flotation devices. The swim took nearly 2 hours, and all 4 team members were near collapse by the time they reached shore. However, they had successfully completed the mission without any team member being killed or seriously injured. Friday morning brought the final challenge of Hell Week. Individual trainees were called into a room with multiple instructors for what was described as a stress interview. The session was designed to test mental toughness and decision-making ability under extreme pressure. Trainees were subjected to rapid-fire questions, contradictory orders, and psychological pressure designed to break down their defenses. When Sarah's turn came, she entered the room to find 5 instructors seated behind a table, all staring at her with expressions that revealed nothing about their intentions. Senior Chief Thompson was in the center, flanked by instructors she had worked with throughout the training program. The questions began immediately, without any introduction or explanation of the rules. They asked her about her motivations for wanting to be there, her understanding of what it meant to be a special operations warrior, and her assessment of her own strengths and weaknesses. Some questions were straightforward, while others seemed designed to provoke an emotional response or reveal hidden biases and fears. One instructor asked if she thought her gender gave her any advantages or disadvantages in special operations. Another wanted to know how she would handle a situation where male teammates questioned her authority or refused to follow her orders. A third instructor described a hypothetical scenario where she might have to kill an enemy combatant who turned out to be a woman or child, and asked how she would deal with the psychological aftermath. Sarah answered each question honestly and directly, drawing on her combat experience and her understanding of military ethics. She acknowledged that her gender might create unique challenges, but argued that diversity of perspective and capability could be an asset in complex operations. She admitted that she would probably struggle with some of the psychological aspects of combat, but pointed out that male warriors faced similar challenges. The stress interview lasted nearly an hour, and by the end, Sarah felt as though the instructors had examined every aspect of her personality and motivation. Thompson dismissed her without any indication of how she had performed, leaving her to wonder if she had passed this final test or revealed some fatal flaw that would end her participation in the program. That evening, all remaining trainees were assembled in the main classroom for what they assumed would be graduation ceremonies. 17 people had started the program 8 weeks earlier. Now only 9 remained, including Sarah and Lisa Chen. Amanda Foster had been eliminated during the 5th week after failing to meet the swimming standards, but she had lasted longer than many of her male counterparts. Senior Chief Thompson stood before the group with the same stern expression he had worn throughout the training program. He began by acknowledging the effort and dedication that each remaining trainee had demonstrated. He explained that completing this experimental program did not make them Navy SEALs, but it did prove that they possessed the basic qualities necessary for special operations work. Thompson then announced that the next phase of their training would involve integration with active SEAL teams for advanced instruction and evaluation. This was the opportunity that Sarah had dreamed of since childhood, the chance to train alongside real Navy SEALs and prove that she could contribute to their missions. However, Thompson also delivered a warning that would prove prophetic in the days ahead. He explained that not everyone in the SEAL community supported the integration of women into their ranks. Some would welcome the opportunity to work with female operators who had proven themselves capable. Others would view their presence as a threat to unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. Thompson looked directly at Sarah as he spoke his final words to the group. He told them that their real test was just beginning, and that they would need to prove themselves again and again to earn the respect and acceptance of the special operations community. He warned them to expect resistance, skepticism, and challenges that went far beyond anything they had experienced during the formal training program. As the ceremony concluded, and the trainees prepared to move on to their next assignments, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had accomplished something that many people had thought impossible, but she also knew that her journey was far from over. The real test would come when she faced active duty SEALs who had not chosen to work with women and might resent her intrusion into their exclusive world. Sarah's assignment to SEAL Team 7 came with a mixture of excitement and dread. The team was based at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, just a few miles from where she had completed her training. Team 7 had a reputation as one of the most professional units in the SEAL community. But they also had a history of being extremely selective about who they accepted into their ranks. The team's commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes, a 15-year veteran who had earned his reputation leading successful missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hayes was known for his tactical brilliance and his ability to bring his men home safely from the most dangerous assignments. He was also known for his traditional views about military service and his skepticism about changes to long-established policies and procedures. Sarah reported to Team 7 headquarters on a Monday morning in late May. The California sun was already warming the training grounds, where she could see SEAL operators conducting advanced exercises. She had studied the personnel files of her new teammates and knew that each man had earned his place through years of training and combat experience. Now she had to prove that she belonged among them. Her first meeting with Lieutenant Commander Hayes took place in his office, a Spartan room decorated only with unit citations and photographs of fallen teammates. Hayes looked up from his paperwork as Sarah entered, and she could see him evaluating her with the same intensity that Senior Chief Thompson had displayed during training. Hayes gestured for her to sit and then studied her personnel file for several minutes before speaking. Hayes explained that Team 7 was scheduled to participate in a major training exercise in 3 weeks. The exercise would involve multiple SEAL teams and would simulate a complex hostage rescue operation that could easily become a real-world mission at any time. Sarah would be integrated into the team as a medical specialist and would be expected to perform at the same level as any other operator. The lieutenant commander made it clear that he had not requested a female operator and was not particularly enthusiastic about the integration experiment. However, he also stated that he would evaluate Sarah based solely on her performance and would not allow personal opinions to influence his judgment. He warned her that some members of the team might be less diplomatic in expressing their reservations about working with women. Sarah's introduction to the rest of Team 7 took place in the team room, where 12 operators were conducting a mission briefing. The conversation stopped when she entered, and Sarah could feel the weight of their collective scrutiny. These were men who had risked their lives together in combat, and she was an unknown quantity who might disrupt the chemistry that had kept them alive in dangerous situations. The team's senior enlisted man was Master Chief Petty Officer Tom Bradley, a 22-year veteran whose arms were covered with tattoos that told the story of his military career. Bradley had served with distinction in every major conflict of the past 2 decades and commanded enormous respect from both junior and senior personnel throughout the SEAL community. Bradley approached Sarah after the briefing and introduced himself with professional courtesy that revealed nothing about his personal opinions. He explained that she would be paired with Petty Officer First Class Mike Chen for initial integration training. Chen was a combat medic specialist who had worked with female military personnel during joint operations and was considered one of the most level-headed members of the team. The first week with Team 7 involved intensive training designed to integrate Sarah into their operational procedures. She learned their communication protocols, studied their preferred tactics and techniques, and practiced with the specialized equipment they used for different types of missions. The work was demanding but straightforward, and Sarah felt confident that she could meet their technical standards. The real challenges began during the second week when the team started conducting realistic combat exercises. Sarah found herself working with men who had developed an almost telepathic understanding of each other's movements and reactions. They could communicate with subtle gestures and expressions that had been refined through years of partnership. Breaking into this tight-knit group was like trying to join a conversation that had been ongoing for decades. Some team members were openly supportive of Sarah's integration. Chen proved to be an excellent mentor who helped her understand the unwritten rules and traditions that governed SEAL culture. Petty Officer Second Class James Rodriguez, a sniper specialist from Texas, treated her with the same professional respect he showed all his teammates. Several others maintained polite neutrality, waiting to see how she would perform under pressure. However, 3 members of the team made no effort to hide their resentment about her presence. The leader of this opposition was Petty Officer First Class Derek Morrison, a veteran of 6 combat deployments who believed that women had no place in special operations. Morrison was subtle in his resistance, never directly confronting Sarah but consistently undermining her confidence through small acts of exclusion and criticism. Morrison's allies were Petty Officer Second Class Steve Williams and Petty Officer Third Class Anthony Davis. Williams was the explosive specialist who seemed to enjoy making Sarah uncomfortable during training exercises. Davis was the youngest member of the team, but he was eager to prove his loyalty to the older operators by adopting their attitudes toward the integration experiment. The tension came to a head during the 3rd week of training, just days before the major exercise that would determine Sarah's future with the team. The incident occurred during a hand-to-hand combat training session that was designed to maintain the operators' fighting skills and build unit cohesion through shared physical challenges. The training took place in a gymnasium that had been converted into a realistic combat environment, complete with obstacles, low lighting, and simulated urban terrain. Team members were paired randomly for sparring sessions that tested their ability to adapt fighting techniques to different opponents and situations. The exercises were conducted with minimal protective gear to maintain realism, and injuries were not uncommon. Sarah had been paired with various teammates throughout the session and had performed well against opponents of different sizes and skill levels. She had learned to use her speed and technique to compensate for her smaller size, and several teammates had commented privately that her medical training gave her an unusual understanding of human anatomy that made her a more effective fighter than her appearance might suggest. The session was nearing its conclusion when Master Chief Bradley announced a final exercise that would involve multiple opponents in a scenario designed to simulate being outnumbered in combat. Sarah found herself facing 3 opponents in succession, with only brief rest periods between each encounter. The exercise was meant to test endurance and mental toughness under extreme stress. Her first opponent was Rodriguez, who fought with controlled aggression that pushed Sarah to her limits without causing serious injury. The match lasted nearly 5 minutes, with both fighters giving and receiving significant punishment. Sarah lost on points but earned Rodriguez's respect through her willingness to continue fighting despite being hurt and exhausted. Her second opponent was Chen, who used his superior size and strength to test Sarah's defensive capabilities. Chen was technically skilled but fought with restraint that allowed Sarah to demonstrate her counter-attacking abilities. She managed to score several successful techniques against him, proving that she could adapt her fighting style to different types of opponents. The final match was against Morrison, and Sarah immediately sensed that this encounter would be different from the previous 2. Morrison approached the center of the training mat with a look of cold determination that suggested he intended to prove something beyond mere training objectives. Master Chief Bradley was serving as the referee, and Sarah noticed that he was paying particularly close attention to this match. Morrison was 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed nearly 200 pounds, giving him significant physical advantages over Sarah. He was also an experienced fighter who had trained in multiple martial arts disciplines before joining the Navy. Most importantly, he was fighting with an intensity that seemed personal rather than professional. The match began with Morrison immediately pressing his size advantage, using his reach and weight to control the distance and pace of the fight. Sarah found herself constantly on the defensive, trying to avoid his powerful strikes while looking for opportunities to counterattack. Morrison's technique was sound, but his emotions were beginning to show in the form of increasingly aggressive attacks. After 2 minutes of defensive fighting, Sarah recognized that Morrison was not treating this as a training exercise. His strikes were aimed at vulnerable targets that could cause serious injury, and his grappling attempts seemed designed to humiliate rather than simply defeat her. She realized that she was facing an opponent who wanted to prove that women could not compete physically with male special operations personnel. The turning point came when Morrison attempted a throwing technique that would have sent Sarah crashing into the concrete wall of the gymnasium. The move was unnecessarily dangerous and violated the safety protocols that govern training exercises. Sarah recognized the attack and responded with a counter technique that her father had taught her years earlier. As Morrison committed to his throw, Sarah shifted her weight and redirected his momentum while simultaneously striking a pressure point on his extended arm. The technique required precise timing and thorough understanding of human anatomy, both skills that Sarah had developed through years of medical training and combat experience. The result was immediate and dramatic. Morrison's arm twisted at an unnatural angle as Sarah's technique caught him off balance and overextended. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the gymnasium as Morrison's radius and ulna snapped under the combined stress of his own momentum and Sarah's counterattack. Morrison screamed in pain and collapsed to the mat, clutching his obviously damaged arm. The gymnasium fell completely silent as the implications of what had just happened became clear to everyone present. Sarah had not only defended herself against a larger, stronger opponent, but she had done so in front of nearly 300 SEAL personnel who had gathered to watch the final training session. Word of the incident would spread throughout the special operations community within hours. Master Chief Bradley immediately called for medical attention while securing the training area. Sarah knelt beside Morrison to assess his injuries, her medical training overriding any personal feelings about their confrontation. The break was clean but severe, requiring immediate professional treatment to prevent permanent damage. Sarah applied a field splint using materials from the training room while waiting for Navy medical personnel to arrive. Morrison was conscious, but in shock from pain and the realization of what had occurred. He stared at Sarah with a mixture of pain, anger, and something that might have been respect. The injury would require surgery and months of rehabilitation, effectively ending his participation in Team 7 for the foreseeable future. Lieutenant Commander Hayes arrived within minutes of the incident and immediately began conducting interviews to determine exactly what had happened. Several team members had witnessed the entire confrontation, and their accounts were consistent. Morrison had initiated unnecessarily aggressive techniques that violated training protocols. Sarah had responded appropriately to defend herself against what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to injure her. The investigation revealed that Morrison had been planning to teach the girl a lesson about trying to join an elite military unit. He had confided his intentions to Williams and Davis, both of whom had encouraged his actions. The three men had conspired to use the training session as an opportunity to demonstrate that women could not handle the physical demands of special operations work. Instead, the incident had the opposite effect. Sarah's technical skill and composure under pressure impressed the SEAL personnel who witnessed the confrontation. Her immediate shift from combat mode to medical mode demonstrated the kind of mental flexibility that was highly valued in special operations. Most importantly, she had proven that she could defend herself against a larger, stronger opponent who was trying to hurt her. Master Chief Bradley later told Sarah privately that Morrison's injury was the result of his own poor judgment and aggressive behavior. Bradley had seen similar incidents throughout his career when personal animosity interfered with professional training. He warned her that there would probably be other challenges ahead, but observed that she had handled this one in exactly the right way. The major training exercise proceeded as scheduled the following week, but with a different dynamic among Team 7 personnel. Morrison's absence created an opportunity for Sarah to fill a critical role in the team's medical support structure. The exercise involved a simulated hostage rescue in an urban environment, requiring precise coordination between multiple teams operating under extreme time pressure. Sarah's performance during the exercise exceeded all expectations. She successfully treated multiple simulated casualties while under enemy fire, coordinated medical evacuations in challenging terrain, and demonstrated tactical awareness that impressed both her teammates and the exercise evaluators. Her actions during one particularly intense scenario helped save the lives of several simulated hostages and prevented the failure of the entire mission. The exercise concluded with a debrief session where team leaders discussed lessons learned and areas for improvement. Lieutenant Commander Hayes specifically praised Sarah's contributions to the mission's success and announced that she would be permanently assigned to Team 7 as their primary medical specialist. The announcement was met with applause from the assembled SEAL personnel, a sign of acceptance that meant more to Sarah than any formal recognition could provide. Following the exercise, several members of Team 7 approached Sarah individually to express their respect for her performance and their support for her continued presence on the team. Rodriguez told her that he had never worked with a more competent medical specialist, regardless of gender. Chen said that her technical skills and calm demeanor under pressure made her an ideal teammate for dangerous missions. Even some of the personnel who had initially been skeptical about women in special operations acknowledged that Sarah had proven herself worthy of their respect. Master Chief Bradley summed up the general sentiment when he told her that she had earned her place on the team through demonstrated competence rather than political correctness or social engineering. The news of Morrison's injury and Sarah's subsequent success spread throughout the military community and eventually reached civilian media outlets. The story became a symbol of changing attitudes toward women in combat roles and sparked debates about gender integration in elite military units. Sarah found herself reluctantly thrust into the spotlight as a representative of all women seeking to serve in special operations. However, Sarah was more interested in continuing her military service than becoming a public figure. She declined most interview requests and focused on preparing for real-world missions with Team 7. The unit was scheduled for deployment to Southeast Asia within 6 months, where they would conduct counterterrorism operations in cooperation with Allied forces. Sarah knew that combat deployment would present new challenges and opportunities to prove herself as a special operations warrior. The training exercises had been demanding and realistic, but nothing could completely prepare her for the stress and complexity of actual combat operations. She would have to earn the trust and respect of her teammates all over again in an environment where mistakes could have fatal consequences. As she prepared for deployment, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had overcome skepticism, prejudice, and physical challenges to earn a place among the most elite warriors in the American military. The confrontation with Morrison had been a pivotal moment that demonstrated her ability to defend herself and maintain her composure under extreme pressure. Most importantly, Sarah had proven that gender was not a determining factor in special operations capability. Her success opened doors for other women who aspired to serve in combat roles and challenged traditional assumptions about military service. She had become living proof that determination, skill, and courage were more important than physical characteristics in determining who could serve effectively in special operations. The incident that had begun with Morrison's attempt to humiliate her had ended with Sarah's acceptance as a full member of one of the most exclusive military units in the world. Her journey from small-town Texas girl to Navy SEAL operator was far from over, but she had successfully navigated the most challenging phase of integration into a community that had never before accepted women as equals. Years later, military historians would point to Sarah's confrontation with Morrison as a turning point in the integration of women into special operations forces. The incident demonstrated that women could not only meet the physical and mental demands of elite military service but could also defend themselves against those who sought to deny them that opportunity. Sarah Martinez had not set out to become a symbol or pioneer, but her courage and competence had changed the face of American special operations forever.